Okay. If our online people can let us know in the chat if they can see and hear, and if everybody who is in the back can clap once and let me know you can hear me. Oh, yeah. All right. Come on. Somebody's got rhythm in this room. Yes. Okay. Our online folks can hear us. And Sig's mom is in the chat.
Hi, Mom.
Most importantly. Okay. Thanks to everyone for your patience. We are so grateful for this beautiful community because y'all are the kind of people who don't get mad at me when stuff breaks. And I appreciate you. I always love to be in a room with so many folks who I know and so many folks who I don't. It is really special to get to celebrate somebody asked me, how do you know Sig? And I said, well, I've known Sig for almost 20 years, I think. And they were like, well, how do you know them? And I was like, I think just from being queer initially. So that's the beauty of Atlanta and the beauty of queer Atlanta. It is my great pleasure always when a friend publishes a book, and especially when a friend publishes a good and important book like this one. So because we are starting a little slow, I won't say too much. It is great to have Sean Saifa Wall in the house tonight.
Yo! Back in Atlanta.
Back with us. He tried to go away.
I did. I tried to stay away too.
But you couldn't.
Just brought me back.
Sean Saifa Wall is a Black queer intersex activist and rising scholar born and raised in the Bronx. Saifa attended Williams College and received his PhD as a Marie Sklodowska.
Sklodowska.
Thank you.
It's a little hard.
Curie Fellow at the University of Huddersfield in England. He is co-founder of the Intersex Justice Project, an initiative by intersex people of color to challenge medically unnecessary surgeries on intersex children and young adults. Above everything, Saifa is determined to end harmful and invasive genital surgery on intersex children and advocates for affirming healthcare for all people with intersex variations. In addition to his work and activism, Saifa is a loving dad to his dog, Justice.
Yo, Justice! Shout out, Justice!
And the person of the hour is Sig/Sara Giordano. Sig is an activist scholar working as an associate professor at Kennesaw State University, specializing in feminist science studies in the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies. Their areas of interest are the politics of ethics of science, with a focus on critical science, literacy, and the democratization of science. And I will just say that Sig is the first person who really helped me understand that science is created by humans and therefore flawed and just as culturally constructed as literature or anything else. And so it is a great honor to get to celebrate this book, Labs of Our Own, Feminist Tinkerings with Science, here at Charis. So give it up for Sig Giordano and Sean Saifa.
All right, I guess we are on. Okay, as Jay-Z would say, you can be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us tonight, and we appreciate you. I think before we start to have this conversation tonight, I had talked to Sig about doing a grounding practice, a centering practice. I'm a trained somatic practitioner through generative somatics. And basically, I think with everything going on, Jesus Christ, it's been so much on our minds, so much on our bodies. And in this conversation tonight, we're going to be talking about science. We're going to be go to different places, right? And I was thinking, like, why not just take a moment just to kind of be with each other, just to kind of be with ourselves. So I'm going to ask if people are going to participate, if you can just take a moment. For the people who are going to participate, yes. And for the people who are like, this is not my thing, love that. This is a brave space. Just try to, just kind of be still and not be on your phone to kind of distract the person next to you. But for the people who are participating, I'm going to invite you into this practice. So where you are, some people need to sit, some people need to stand, whether you're sitting or standing, I'm just going to ask you to just take a moment to just breathe. And really allow your feet to be on the floor, both feet. really connect with the earth. Really just take a moment to notice. Notice what is happening inside of you, what is happening around you, and really sort of bring your attention to the body. And if you want to know where your center is, it's about 2 inches below your belly button. So if it helps to put a hand there, put a hand there. If it helps to bring your attention there, bring your attention there. So we're going to center in 3 directions. We're going to center in our length, which we associate with dignity. We're going to center in our width, which we associate with expansiveness and boundaries. And we're going to center in our depth, which we associate with ancestry and with legacy. So as you're doing a scan of your body, just notice, especially notice below your neck, places where you can feel, places where you can't feel, where there may be pain, where there may be joy. Just really notice, take it in. So from center, I'm going to ask us all to center in our length, which we associate with dignity. So if you can, imagine that your feet are the roots of a tree, your body is the trunk of the tree, and your head is the canopy. You know, we're living in a time right now where there's an attack on our dignity, an attack on who we are. So if you can, in this moment, really allow yourself to feel your dignity. Imagine if your spine is like this column made of steel that is holding you up. Really try to feel into your dignity, feel into your power. So from center, I'm going to ask us to center into our width, which we associate with expansiveness and boundaries. So if you can, notice the space between your feet, between your knees, your hips, your shoulders, and your ears. In this last year and a half, we have witnessed death. We have witnessed the crossing of boundaries, the crossing of borders. We have witnessed war. So if you can, and just to bring it back to the body for a second, some of us, there are so many lineages in this room. We have been told to be smaller, to collapse, to hide. So if you can, try to take a little bit more space. Try to notice how that feels when you take up a little bit more space in your body. What does it bring up? What do you notice? So from center, I'm going to ask us to center in our depth, which we associate with ancestry and with legacy. As many people are in this room, we have really complicated relationships to ancestry. Some of us may know our ancestors. Some of us may not know our ancestors. We may be adopted. We may have very complicated relationships to our ancestors. We may have had ancestors who have loved us, and we may have had ancestors who have harmed us. So in this moment, I'm going to ask you to invoke an ancestor who loves you, who loved you, who is your guide, and who is with you on the other side of the veil. Feel their hands at your back once more. So, in moving toward our legacy, with a heart that never stops beating, lungs that expand and contract, taking in air, a stomach that churns food and information for the nourishment of our bodies, let us be reminded that we will die. Every single one of us in this room will die. So, in feeling into your own death, your own legacy, what is important to you? What do you care about? What do you long for? And really sit with it. Really let that question sit with you and let it fill you up. So I'm going to ask everyone just to take a deep breath into that center. If you have your eyes closed, please come back into the room. Really notice who's around you. And really just take a moment just to check in with someone. I mean, it's optional, of course, but just check in with someone and just share a little bit about what came up for you during that practice.
Feel it everywhere. I think so many people told me part of what coming today is just to be with people in this moment. So I feel like thank you for that offering.
Yeah, it's just so, I think the thing about fascism is that it just totally disconnects us from each other. And I think, like, for me, it's just so important just to be in my body and notice, like, I think I always feel a little bit of what's going on, feeling other people and, like, feeling myself. And it's like, yes, it's like a lot moving,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let people simmer for a couple moments and bring people back. But it's just again, just such a great turnout. And I think it's just such a testament to the work that you've done. Just how you just so much a part of this community. So, yeah.
Thanks for bringing hope. I like our intersections. We got a lot of people, and then we have some new people meeting.
Totally.
That's right.
All right. I'm just going to ask us if we can just to bring the conversation to a close. If there's some juicy bits that came up in the conversation, really take the time afterwards to really connect. I'm gonna bring you on, Sig. But I just want to say, when Sig approached me to be part of this, I was honored because I was like, wow, Sig be doing the work. Sig be out here, and you're just such a vital part of Atlanta. So yeah, I just feel really honored to be in this conversation with you and just to hold this space and be in the space with you. So yeah, we're gonna keep it. We're gonna do what we do. We're gonna keep it nice and robust. But yeah, I'm gonna hand the floor over to you, Sig.
Yeah, thanks so much, Saifa. Yeah, thank you again for everyone who's here in person. We have an amazing turnout, and online, I'm sure, as well. And yes, everyone's connected. So yeah, when I asked Saifa, I was nervous, of course, because it's like asking someone it feels like a huge favor. Like this is like a lot of labor and work to put into coming here and being part of this conversation. And I am so grateful that you said yes, and you really did say an enthusiastic yes. And we've been in conversation since then. And Saifa and I have been working over the last few years on a project that we're going to start working more on, more intimately on, which hopefully another time we'll be back here talking about this like critical biology curriculum that we're working on. But I've been a huge, I've been an admirer and student of your work for so long, and so grateful. I remember when you first came to Atlanta and it was all the buzz.
Wow.
Yeah, we have another, like rad intersex activist here and then like all the work that you've done, obviously with intersex work, but beyond with the medical industrial complex and really giving us a way forward. So one of the reasons that I asked you all of this to say, besides being charming and a wonderful interlocutor, like I feel like we have a good rapport, to be able to have a conversation, which is the mood that I wanted this to be, is that also this book is about crossing the boundaries from the academy. And I think that the work you do really, for me, exemplifies the kind of activist science that I think that we need to center more when we talk about science, or if we're going to use and try to reclaim science. So
I hear
I'll
that.
have to say thank you.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do was read a little bit from the preface and introduction. So it'll be like under 10 minutes from the beginning of the book. And then we're going to just have a conversation with Saifa, some questions for me.
I do.
Interrogation, the lights are on. So, and also one more, just a couple more thank yous before to Charis again while we're online. Charis has been a home for me since the very beginning of what I'm going to be talking about, which is when I moved here in 2001 and when I started becoming politicized. Charis was a home for anti-war activists, for me to learn what it means to be queer in a politically queer and fully my full life being queer in all the ways that what that means to me and many of us in this room, regardless of who we have sex with. And so it's just really meaningful. And thank you, ER. Yeah, I don't know exactly how we met, but I'm glad you didn't tell any of the embarrassing stories. So I was gonna bleep out some of that, but Queer Atlanta's here, so thank you. Also, thanks to my family that's online, all the folks in the room. Thank you to my chair, Stacey Keltner's here, and who has really actually made this book past the final lines, the finish line, through so much support, both emotional and finding financial resources at Kennesaw to make sure that this happened. And the amazing artist, Matteo Farinella, who did this beautiful cover art. And he insisted, which I really respect, that it's totally open Creative Commons work. So if people want to use this for something other than the book cover, they're welcome to use it. Okay. So with that, this is the beginning. The prelude. Several years ago, I attended a community building event at my university for faculty who worked across academic, non-academic borders. The conveners asked us to each tell a story about a time when we felt that we did not belong. This book is about how community and belonging is built and mobilized in different claims for laboratory space of one's own. I highlight here how defining community borders always creates inclusions and exclusions. Therefore, the story that I shared that night of not belonging as I began my scientific career seems an appropriate place to start. I began graduate school a couple weeks after September 11, 2001. 1 month earlier, I officially had changed my permanent residence to somewhere outside of New York City for the first time in my life. As I remember it, the news of the attacks came in as I was getting ready to head to school that day. I began monitoring the news, and shortly later, I received an email that classes would be canceled. Across the mainstream political spectrum, there was little distinction between Democrat and Republican. Some of this may seem really familiar to today, so I just want to warn you. As the rhetoric of us versus them was agreed upon. For example, then Senator Hillary Clinton's language in September of that year, right after, was, she said, "Every nation has to either be with us or against us. Those who harbor terrorists or who finance them are going to pay a price," end quote. It was nearly identical to that of then U.S. President George Bush, who said, "Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists," end quote. It became clear that the United States was headed to war and the room for dissent was significantly narrowed. Music stations began censoring songs. Critique of the United States by TV personalities was met with firing. Not putting up an American flag made your neighbors question you. And not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance at a sports game came with a new level of vitriol. Arabs and Muslims and those assumed to be so were being detained by the government and harassed and literally murdered by white Americans in retaliation. The rhetoric from government officials directed to other nations, as I highlighted above with Clinton and Bush's statements, was clearly meant as actually a warning to all of us. The next time class convened, I felt totally alone in a classroom of over 50 other graduate students taking introductory biochemistry. I felt so confused and out of place. Talk of invasion was already on the news, and people were being beaten up in the streets. How could we be sitting here going on with business as usual? As I struggled in a new city with only my partner to trust, we both searched the internet for other kinds of news and counter discourses. There was no Facebook or Twitter, or X, I guess, of course. And websites were still relatively new. Our neuroscience program, this is where I was doing my PhD, had an email mailing list that reached hundreds of us at the time. It was students, faculty, affiliated faculty, and other interested community members. As I was sitting at the computer struggling to find something that made sense, an email supposedly about the Taliban came through on the mailing list from one of our senior faculty members. I quickly read the email and immediately knew it was what we would now call fake news. The email claimed that the Taliban was tattooing numbers of prisoners' arms and constructing concentration camps. This attempt to directly compare the Taliban to the Nazi regime was easy to spot. But this senior scholar did not question the news and did not fact-check it before sending it out to hundreds of people. I decided that this would be the forum for me to share my own political thoughts. Those of you who work with me, sorry, Stacy, this is what I do. Still, I crafted an email critiquing the fake news that had been sent out and focusing on what I saw as a dangerous and extreme nationalism in the US. I called on us as academics who get paid to think and solve problems to be actively involved in stopping this war, state repression, and extreme nationalism. It would be an understatement to say that this email was not looked upon favorably by my colleagues. I received my first hate mail, and it was pretty vicious. Some senior faculty suggested that I deserved to literally die for my treason. I held on tightly to the few emails from people thanking me. Some faculty caught me in the halls to tell me that I was brave. By the end of the email fiasco, the administrative assistant for the program sent out an apology on my behalf for using the email list against its purposes, stating that I was new and I just did not know better. This was in spite of a passionate meeting in her office in which I told her I did not want her to send such an email. I was not sorry. And again, sounds familiar. And the original email forwarding that the senior scholar had done about the Taliban scam is what should be reprimanded. I also received a Sunday morning call at home from the director of graduate studies who implored me to not drop out and assured me that I was welcome despite the hate mail and anger among some faculty. I did ultimately decide to stay in the program, receiving my PhD. However, this began what I describe later in this book as my eventual failure and defection from the sciences proper. Throughout this book, Labs of Our Own, I look at how communities are formed through affective attachments. Judith Butler was among those arguing at the time for a third way of understanding the us versus them rhetoric to get out of that binary. She said in 2004 in print, I propose to consider a dimension of political life that has to do with our exposure to violence and our complicity in it, with our vulnerability to loss and the task of mourning that follows, and with finding a basis for community in these conditions. Butler asks us to imagine different ways of finding common cause around violence and mourning in the moments after 9/11, forcing us to examine whose lives are and whose lives are not grievable, and why that is so in the United States. I did not have Butler's words at the time, but I felt a realignment of community and belonging. The affective dissonance that I experienced of not feeling properly connected to the supposed us I was supposed to be mourning and avenging through violence towards others created a new kind of community belonging. The other community was one that was passionately dedicated to creating another kind of world, real social justice, an end to gendered racial capitalism, queer liberation, and knowledge practices to match these aims. I'm going to read just a little more from the introduction, which to say in 2008, I did receive my PhD in neuroscience, and this was the culmination of 7 years of postgraduate learning after this point I just talked about. My science education took place not only in classrooms and labs of Emory University, but in the greater Atlanta area as well, in the streets, in coffee shop meetings, and during late night kitchen table planning sessions with many of you, some of you in this room who I've known for just that long. I eventually I became immersed in left activism, and my initial post 9/11 anti-war activism led me eventually to feminist, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, queer, intersex, and disability justice activist communities. I then, during that time, I began at the urging of activists here, other activists, and especially reproductive justice activists, to try to merge my day job, which was my PhD work, with my activism. And some of that was because of feminist science studies, which I was reading and is a big part of this book as well. Creating more democratic sciences then, especially for those who have traditionally been kept out of science, has been my focus ever since leaving the sciences proper in 2008. So in this book, what I do is analyze seemingly disparate sites of democratic science experimentation, asking questions like, who is pushing for democratic sciences and why? How are all these attempts related? What does it mean for how we structure not only science, but our larger society through democratic ideals? Not all democratic sciences are created equally. So how do we navigate the various rhetorics of democratic science, social justice, and scientific revolutions? This book is about politics and practices of democratic sciences in the mid-teens of the 21st century, but I think it's really relevant still right now. By democratic sciences, I mean any sciences that are participatory, that are conducted outside and across university borders, that not only claim to be for us, but are created by us. The question of who is meant by us, then, is critical and crucial to ask across these various sites. So some of the sites I look at is physical DIY community bio laboratories, feminist studies departments in classrooms, and anti-capitalist activists and artists. The implications of how greater participation in science through democratic sciences such as DIY bio is realized or not matter not only for those who are calling for it. Attempts to make science more democratic impact and are impacted by the structuring of our societies. Whether you have participated in DIY or democratic science or not, you are likely impacted by these debates over science that this book traces. That's my plug.
All right. Yeah. All right. How the folks in the back doing? All right. All right. Just want to make sure, just doing a temperature check. Yo, thank you so much for that opening, Sig. Really appreciate you. I was like, man, let me tell you something. My brain's still recovering, you know what I'm saying? Because I finished my PhD in 2004. My brain feels like mush. No, 2024. Jesus Christ. In 2024, my brain still feels like much. So reading is like, ooh, if it's not like popping, it's like, ah. But, this was a really solid read, and what I appreciate about the book is that there's like a blending of like really critiquing like the sciences, the hard sciences, but also there's a through line of like, social justice principles, right? It's not like you just mentioned gender racial capitalism one time. You're like, I did it. I did my good white person thing. Like you like took it through all the way to the end, which I appreciate, And so, as I was going through the book, like I had some questions and I was like, I wonder what Sig, was thinking about this, So, I have my little trusty book. I kind of write recipes in here too. So like, people want like a recipe for like, Thai pork necks is really good. Or like, I don't know, maybe I got something for the vegans or vegetarians. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. Holla at me, this is my little blue book.
Love it.
I
love it. That's great.
So I think the first question, I'm trying to get into my Oprah thing, my first question to you is that what inspired you to write the book? And why now?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So and I like to be, at least 97% honest usually. I don't want to go too far, but to be mostly honest, I had to write a book for my job, right? And so if we're going to talk about capitalism, like it was my job, which is why I was also ambivalent about today. I wanted to and I talked to a lot of loved ones about this. Like, I am so happy to see so many people I care about in different ways here and be part of this and having these critical, what I do think are important conversations. And it's like, why is my name on top of this book, right? Like, why did I have to produce this thing? And so there's both. And I actually started the book because I was switching jobs, which is really real, right? And so like I was switching jobs because I wanted to get back here to my community in Atlanta, and so I was moving locations. And when I was moving to UC Davis, I was told as I took the job to get tenure there, you need a book, and I was like, why? And so they repeated it because why? Yeah. So anyway, I stopped asking why, and I started writing a book. And what I did was I was like, oh, okay, so it's actually started as a really practical thing of like I need to do this because I want to keep my job, right? I want to get paid, and I want to make more money there. And that's how, and I want to get that tenure security. So I started working on the book, and I was like, what do I know? How do I put things together? How do you write a book? And a lot of people, one of the things that happened for me was that like academia is, as many people here probably know either personally or through folks nearby, academia as you move on becomes more and more narrow, and then you just keep following a more and more narrow path, right? And so I had my PhD in neuroscience, but a lot of people who ended up in but I wanted to leave, right? I talk in the book about defecting, and to be able to leave, I went to a program that was the way that you are, the way you do research, and the way you actually communicate is totally different between departments. And I talk about this a little bit in the book too. So in the sciences have a lot of privilege. I talk about privilege of science in the book that we don't want to talk about. And I think that right now people might say like, oh, don't say that, science is under attack. I think especially right now, we need to say that, and we need to talk about what the reality is of what science is, so that we can think about where the solidarities actually are and what kind of knowledge we do need to create, right? And so science has a huge amount of privilege in the academy. And so everything from being able to be more casual to have to be more professional when you're in like other kinds of departments in the university are totally different. I could say things that I can't say in a feminist studies department when I was a scientist, right? That seems weird, but if we know anything about like privilege politics, right, like this is pretty much true. So in changing departments, one of the things was that like you learn to write in the same way, right? And so I had learned that you write an article, and I kept like, as I moved out of the sciences, I kept asking a good comrade and long-term life partner, co-parent, Angie Willie, I kept asking her, I'd be like, okay, like what's the template? Like, how do you write something in the humanities or in feminist studies? She's like, there's no template. I'm like, no. I mean, let me explain to you because you don't understand what I'm saying because you're not a scientist. No. I was like, let me explain to you. There is a template. So like, I was like, for example, what I mean is you do an introduction with the background, then you're going to write your methods, then you're going to write your results, then you're going to have the discussion, and you might write a conclusion. And then you put your references. It's like, well, okay, cool. So yeah. She's like, wait, you just do the same thing over and over. So like, so there's like not that. So I had actually a lot of trouble getting started. Is all that to say, and it was difficult. And so I was like, and a lot of people in my field, they make their dissertations into the book. So this book is not my dissertation, right? And so I had to start from like, what do I want to put together, which I think was actually a cool project, because then I got to think about what I wanted to say from some of the stuff that I had worked on already, but I got to like pull it together. And so that was why now is, I got to the last few years and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to throw this away. And again, then Stacy was like, don't throw it away, right? Like, get this done, and here, let me help you. And other people too kept telling me not to throw it away. And so getting it done, I was like, okay, again, it'll like, it's my job. I'll get praise at work. But I think right now I'm like, we critically need to talk about science, right? And we can't talk about it. What I talk about in the book is like, we can't talk about it as being pro or anti-science. Like, that's not going to work. So I start off talking about like, how is it that we saw these signs during like the first Trump administration? There were like marches for science, for example, right? Like, some people here who I care about, right? Like, went to marches for science, right? People planned marches for science. And I was like, how are you planning a march for science? Like, this is a social justice thing, right? A march for something. Science is not a marginalized group, nor is it one political like set of priorities, right? Like, science is a field, it's an institution, right? And science has actually been part of creating a lot of the things that we have to march against all the time, right? And so science is not neutral. As thank you, ER, for saying that. That really warmed my heart. That like, science is created by humans, right? And science is not only created by humans, but science is created by some of the most privileged humans over the last few hundred years. And so that, I think that having those real conversations can maybe change us and kind of, I think, hopefully, my hope is kind of jiggle us out of this, like, for folks who say like, oh, well, people who are saying anti-science things are also saying racist things. So then, like, that means I must be pro-science. It's like, we're smarter than that, right? And so like, we're smarter than just saying the opposite of whatever people who we know are, effed up are saying, right? That doesn't mean everything somebody says, we knee jerk say the other thing. So I guess that's some of the why, but I think it's critical right now.
Yo. And before I go to my next question, I do want to kind of touch on, like, you wanted to throw the manuscript right away. You were just like, man, fuck this. Yeah, and so where was the turning point where you were just like, you know what, actually I'm not going to do that?
Well, also, like, once you've written a lot of stuff, so again, just practically, I had like a lot of stuff written. it's like, and I actually love writing. So like, I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Write a lot of other stuff that I hate in 3 years or 5 years? So like, editing is one of the hardest things, right? Actually, I was talking to one of my kids who's here today, who was just asking me, right? Like, have you ever thrown it? You asked me earlier today. Do you remember, like, have you ever thrown anything away, or do you ever hate? I think was that. Do you ever hate anything after you've written it, right? And I was like, yeah. And then we were talking about like, like how many people write things and then burn it or throw it away or do art, right? As you said. And so absolutely. And one of the things that's really interesting as I'm sitting here is like, people kept saying that's totally normal. And I was like, I'm not normal. No, I really mean it. Like, I'm not going to feel the same way as everybody else. I am so unique. I'm the most unique butterfly out there. Right. Yeah, and so like, I was like, no, I like hate it for real. But now I don't hate it as much as I hated it then. So everybody else, you were right. That's it. I'm not saying it again. Delete that. Did you? Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Edit.
So I think you kind of like answered this, but I'll kind of put it out there again. Like, as I said earlier, like, I really loved how you blended like activists, activist shit. Like, you quoted like M. Adams, right? Who's with, Movement for Black Lives. And I, like how you combine like the hard sciences with the activist thinking too. And so it's like, how do you also walk that line, right? Like, and like, where's the comfort and where are the contradictions?
Yeah. And for me personally, or where do I think that folks?
For you personally.
Yeah, for me personally, how do I walk it? That's an interesting question. I think I usually like,
interesting.
I said at the beginning that like and throughout the book, I call myself a defector from the sciences, and some of my mentors got upset because I called them defectors too. So I added a footnote that not everybody who I'm claiming as a defector from science claims this title. Is that okay? Okay. So but the reason I said some of the things I said about defecting from the hard sciences is that I think that the role I have to play, and some of what I do in this book, is actually be able to share what happens in day-to-day life for scientists so that there can be more collaborations with folks who actually do want to engage with activist science projects. And I think so I think that's one of the things I do, and also be able to call out stuff like when scientists are getting up there and saying like, we have to save science because like otherwise we wouldn't know about climate change. And I'm like, oh, wait, what? The scientists didn't figure out climate change. Like indigenous activists have been saying this for a long time and are still saying this and aren't coming up with techno fixes to try to make us buy new things or supposedly renewable resources that are stealing other kinds of stealing resources from new places around the globe and being like, look, right, climate change is a problem, so now we're going to figure out this, right? This is where I think being able to say, wait, like, you said something. A lot of times scientists say something that's already been said, that's already been known actually by activists. And how do we reclaim that space? And I think that there's a role, like I can walk into a room and it's not actually like, while it's not fair, I also could be like, right, you're like telling me that. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because like when I worked on an NIH grant, this is what I know. I have a PhD in neuroscience. I'm sorry. This is, and so like using that kind of perspective, that sounded like somebody's laugh who I'm familiar with, but who's heard me say that. Yeah. So I think walking that line is trying to hold scientists accountable and not be in like the buddy zone, but be in the like, let's make this accountable practice for those who are serious. And there are a lot of people who are serious about it, and then there's a lot of people who aren't.
Right. Before I go into my next questions, for me, and I see some, trans folks, probably some intersex folks in the room. Yes, shout out non-binary folks. See y'all. I know when Trump issued the defining male and female executive order, I was pissed, But, more than just being pissed, I think I was just really saddened just to see like trans folks, intersex folks online and on social media being like, I'm being erased, especially intersex folks. Like that shit hurt my fucking heart, And it's just like, we know the science and we know, there's, the spectrum of intersex traits. It's just like biology is so complex, blah, blah. We all know that. And it's just like, just to see it just sort of like, just to be used. Oh shit. Okay. Just to be used for political clout or gain is just like so terrible. But
yeah.
So I think that kind of leads me into my next question, which is like, how do you, Sig, as a scientist, like how do you navigate pseudoscience, especially now under the Trump administration, and like what feelings come up?
Yeah. I think that like for me, I actually, I think going back and actually not calling anything pseudoscience and calling it all science, and then having everything have to stand up to the same accountability is what I recommend. Because I think that when we call something pseudoscience, what happens is it means that those scientists who are actually have science credentials are off the hook. But more importantly, capital S science, like the dominant forms of science, are off the hook to imagine it as always being a progressive force. So what I mean that is like, like when we think about, like we often call pseudoscience stuff from like the eugenics era or something, or phrenology or something that's like, oh, those are pseudosciences. I mean, I was in a neuroscience program, and my my professors would sometimes give presentations and they would start with phrenology. And this is actually part of the history, and actually eugenics is part of the history of genetics. So if you want to claim something about genetics that is useful, and I'm not sure if it is or not, right? I actually think that should be a question, but you can't pretend that it is not. The name change from the eugenics, the American Eugenical Society became the American Genetics Society. And so to not talk about that history means that we can't interrogate it, right? So I think it's actually a problem to call it pseudoscience. So you bring it up. I haven't thought about the title like pseudoscience in terms of this in terms of the latest executive order that you talk about. So I'd have to do a little bit more thinking about how to think about that part. But I did talk about it with my class, and I think part of it was like I was already that was like before that executive order came out. I already had my class set up for this semester, so I was already speaking that week about, actually I showed a film, a great film, everybody check it out on Pluto. Yeah, is that Pluto TV?
It's Peacock.
No? Peacock TV.
Yeah, Peacock.
Delete
Sorry,
that too.
Amazon.
Thanks, Eeyore. Okay, Peacock TV. But anyway, I wish we could get it other places. But yeah, Saifa's in this rad documentary called Everybody that came out 2 years ago now. A year to 2 years ago.
Like 2 years ago.
And I already had it on my syllabus, right? And we were already talking about a lot of things about the class is love and sex, but we were talking about the role of science in love and sex. And so it was already there. But then when we got to discussion, I brought the executive orders in to talk about. But I also brought in a biology textbook, right? And so the biology textbooks, for the most part, still teach male and female sex. Like, so it's like the science, that is the science. So we can get, we should pull those executive orders off and like write all over them and explain what the freak is going on, right? Like this needs to be like actually gone through, and this is part of what I call for with like critical science literacy. But I think it has to be done with everything, because actually calling those so now I'm kind of getting into it. The like executive order, you call it pseudoscience, but then the biology textbooks still say male, female, and then sometimes say there are these anomalies, right? And that's not what we actually know from activists and activist scientists about what our bodies are like, and looking back at the history of colonialism and how bodies had to start like fitting into two categories, right? So we know this from what I'll call like interdisciplinary biology, right? That's what we're working on. So like thinking about it, like biology always has to do with history and culture, and so like how do we, if we want to make good science now, if we want to make ethical science now, we don't try to like remove those biases of history and culture, because it's literally impossible. Instead, we have to choose what values we're putting in and what histories we're putting in, right? And so if we put it in and we understand where this idea of binarizing everything came from, clue Europe. And so like, right, they only had two, they only could count to two there. And so it was like everything had to be in twos. And so, but no, there's better explanation. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Oh wait, good and bad, right? So that's the better understanding of it, right? Like the good and the other, and so but to understand that is where it came from, because that's still in the textbooks, right? So we could all like get all our like good people together to rip up the executive order and push off this pseudoscience, but the biology textbooks are still there. And even we did in class, which was very interesting, we went to one of the more modern biology textbooks that's on the internet. And so this is a new fangled invention, and it's like, so you can update it more easily than like waiting for it to print out. I guess people know how that works. But I'm just like, I was like thinking through, like, I'm still like thinking textbooks are like this, but biology textbooks are like actually online a lot now. And so you can update them more quickly. And in there was also like the description of sex differentiation still had it as, even within like the spectrum, it was like two sides. And my class was asking questions like, wait, but that still has two poles, right? Again, we've asked better questions than that. Like, what other dimensions are we talking about here, right? Like when people speak about whether it's intersectionality or the intersecting ideas of different kinds of differences that have been put on our bodies and put into our bodies, and we've put back out, we understand that it's much more complex than even updating to like some kind of just one line.
Totally.
Right? Yeah.
Totally. All right. Thank you. ER, I just want to do a time check. How are we on time?
Yeah.
Okay. So, see, that's why I'm glad, as my homie LP would say, I'm locked in. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to just, I really like in the book how you like really go through, and then you have these vignettes, which is like a little pause to kind of be like, well, let me do some reflecting. And I was just like, oh, yes. But yeah, I kind of want to do a little activity before we go into Q&A, right? And so this is on page 53 as part of interlude 2. And this is what, I'm going to ask people to sort of turn to someone and have a little chat about this. But there is modesty in saying that we do not know what we are doing, but are searching for answers. I'm going to repeat it again for folks who don't have the book. There is modesty in saying that we do not know what we are doing, but are searching for answers. Did everybody get that? Everybody heard that? So if you can, turn to someone and just kind of share, like, what kind of comes up for you when you hear that sentence, especially in the context of now, maybe in the context of science. This is what comes up for you.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. How about you?
Good. Yeah, it goes quick. It's fast.
No, totally. Yeah, I was just like, yeah. Like, I feel like you're just so good when it comes to answering questions. Like, whoa, you're just so, I can really feel your passion.
Thank you. Hopefully I don't. Sometimes people are like, and then you start yelling, and I'm like, oh, I'm not like that. I'm just from New York. Right? Is that true?
Listen,
So
yo!
you have to be careful when there's another New Yorker around, because I sometimes, do you ever blame things on being from New York and then there's somebody else around? Or do you, no, you don't try that trick?
I haven't lived in New York for like some time, but
That's why I'm like, no, I'm just laughing.
But then the thing is, people will blame me from being from New York. Because they're like, oh, you do that thing because you're from New
You
York.
don't understand, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just such a good turnout.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is so good. I really like what you had said too about I think it created a new neural pathway in my brain and thinking about like pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like separating out.
It's like it's all science, right? And really kind of historicizing it and being like, yeah, this is science at that point in time, but it was still science, right? And I'm just like,
I appreciate that. Yeah. I think it's like, it's sometimes blasphemous to say that. But I think it's like, we see what science and medicine has done. It's like, it doesn't, and it's like, they can do good things, but it's not, but like, there's this idea that it's only good, so everything that's bad is like, that was the wrong science, still keeps,
right, but yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that's so important, especially now.
I think it's the way to win. Being a little more like, you're like, we're not just going to be happy going back to the like a little bit better.
Wait, say that again?
Like, we're not okay with just going back to like a little bit better. Like, sure, like this stuff's outrageous, but like, look at what we're learning.
Look at what?
Look at what we're learning now. Like, that's outrageous too. Like, you should be outraged.
No, totally.
We know this. How long do we know this? And you're writing that about sex differentiation as if like these are anomalies, and sex differentiation isn't a thing that was created by our cultural ideas. Like, why? How is that even possible?
Right. Thinking probably bring people back around 40.
And then take some questions. Yeah. Cool.
Oh. Thanks, Daddy. Oh.
Thanks, Elder.
Yeah, it's so cute that your mom is online.
She's so sweet.
All right. All right. We're going to be bringing people back into the room. You can. Oh yes, I like how it's just the chatter is coming down to a nice, quiet. Folks in the back. So the folks in the back. You know what I'm saying? Folks in the back, we're coming back to the space. Because of the AB audio visual. Oh, I'm dating myself. AB. Wow. Okay.
He was on AV Squad. We know now.
You know, totally. So if folks have questions, I believe ER is going to go around with the mic. So yeah, this is the time for people to ask your questions. And yeah.
Raise your hand, and I will come to you.
Yeah, totally.
Wherever you are.
Oh.
Yeah, all right.
I'm not repeating that again, what you asked me to.
Oh, wow. Wait, what?
I'm so excited to read it, but I'm curious, you talked a few times about being a defector from science and the amount of privilege that it has. And so as I was listening, I was thinking about, like, what happens if you cede the space? Like, what's the strategy for correction if you position yourself outside of it?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Cindy. Yeah, so also, like, in the book I use this terminology of, like, which comes from other feminists and philosophers, of, like, using capital S science. So I consider myself defecting from capital S science, and then the quick answer, and then I consider myself struggling with what kind of lowercase s sciences we can create and reclaim space in. But I think also I do want to, like, address the, like, even ceding the space of capital S science, because that is important. And that is something that, like, my mentors in RJ work here had said, like, you know, like, we need you to get your PhD because there's stuff we need to, like, know about that we think you can do, right? And so that had actually started me on a path. And that was probably like 2005 or 2006, when at that point, I guess similar to, like, when I said I was going to throw away my book, I was going to throw away my PhD work. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, I just found out that science is not neutral. Like, I'm implicated. And then I went to ER's house and I was like, guess what I found out? And so then we spread the good word. And when I found that out, I just wanted to distance totally. And then I was told, no, wait, hang in there. So I did hang in there. And then I even, so what I did was, I actually think was kind of cool and interesting, because I found out that scientists were really interested in the stuff, just like I was, that I was finding out about, that I was so pissed that my scientist mentors and, like, my professors hadn't shared with me. So, for example, an intersex activist friend of mine and comrade had, like, gave me her copy of Sexing the Body by Anne Fausto Sterling. And I was livid. I was like, how come I have been in, like, sciences for this long and I have not read this book? If you haven't read this book, it's you know, I mean, she's now half canceled, but like, you know, the book is still, I think there's a lot of worthy things in the book. Just don't follow Anne Fausto Sterling too closely, the author. So, but the book changed my, like, and she's trained as a scientist. I won't give away too much, but, like, it blew up the idea of, like, this naturalized idea of sex and of scientific experiments and scientists themselves. And so I was so mad, and I was really mad because I felt cheated. We go into science, those of us who went into science, and I see many folks who went into science in this room, not because we're, like, evil scientists who, like, we're like, we are going to rule the world and we are going to make lots of money, right? Well, now people know about biotech, so maybe. But, like, most of us, that's not our goal. And we want to do good in the world. And so it makes us upset when we feel lied to. And so I felt upset. And then I felt like, after I decided to stay, or convinced to stay, coerced. I mean, these activists were badass. So I was like, had to stay, right? And so I was like, I'm going to change my dissertation. So I had already done all the research, but I interpreted all the research through what I was starting my budding feminist science lens. And so I had a history chapter on where the idea of muscles came from and the history of how the language of muscles changed. I have like never, like, I'd had a lot of friends who got PhDs and they had like no marks on their dissertation. People had read on my committee every page of my dissertation. Wow. They were super interested. And then I was talking about like disability studies and like challenging the idea of like normalization in it and how our work could relate to that and learn from that. And I was, like I brought in different things in every chapter from the like little bits that I was learning. And my committee was fascinated, and I was like, "Oh my God, they're salvageable, right? Like, this is like, don't, and I can do this, right? I can actually change what I say in the book. Well, there's an edit. There's a really embarrassing typo. It says like, I wanted to do science from the top down instead of bottom up. It's it's like literally the opposite. So I went back to the sciences, and I wanted to do science from the bottom up instead of the top down. And so I went back, my committee was excited. We did the, I got the PhD, and then I said, okay, I'm going to find a postdoc. And I want to start, because I hadn't been able to start my work. I was just reflecting on it afterwards from this lens. I was like, this is great. Like, I do stuff. I'm going to go work with folks who like are in disability studies alongside motor systems folks, and we're going to do something really rad. And I remember this one program that I interviewed in that had a really, it was in Chicago, I forget which school now, but like it had a rad like disability studies program. I talked to folks there, they were really into it. And then I went to the lab of someone who worked on research for people with quadriplegia, trying to figure out how to help people with quadriplegia like be able to walk. And so I'm telling him this idea, and he's like nodding, and I'm like, what if we actually work with, this sounds really stupid if you're not a scientist, but I swear this is how it goes, right? Like, what if we actually talk to people with quadriplegia? I mean, it's like we're really behind, right? And so like I mean, this is why it's like, please don't just march for science. March for controlling democratic science, right? We need a lot of help. And so he was like nodding, and he's like, and then I said, so do you think I could do a postdoc? I already talked to this program. We could do this cool stuff. And he has millions and millions of dollars of equipment to test walking in this like series of rooms that we're meeting in. And he goes, oh no, I've already read studies about what people want with quadriplegia, and walking isn't the number one thing, but that's what gets funding. Woof. And sent me on my way. And like this is not an exact, so everyone I went to said, this is amazing, but that's not where the funding is to do that kind of work, right? And so as we're again talking today about the funding freezes and the funding problem, I implore anybody who's worried about that to challenge scientists, and scientists who are worried that to challenge them to actually work from the bottom up, so that you have masses of people who believe in the mission for real, not trying to convince the public to get behind what's already been being funded, but actually change what we're doing so that we actually have legitimate democratic sciences happening.
That's what's up.
We have an online question from Yolanda. Yolanda says, what readily available science and common sense based templates and talking points could we share with political stakeholders to counter harmful, unresearched policies?
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, go to, Saifa has a website.
Oh man. Ooh, Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, what's easy to...
My God.
Go.
It's just, oh my God. I mean, it's just like, do you want the long or the short, you know? Can you repeat the question? Because this is a long question.
Yeah, so basically, Yolanda is asking, what are readily available, common sense based templates and talking points that we can share with political stakeholders to counter harmful and or unresearched policies?
Wow. I mean, just from the work I do, well, we need more, but I think the problem is that so many of these stakeholders, these political stakeholders, the people who are making the decisions, they're already bought out, you know? And I think I want to be humble and say we need to really revise our strategies, right? Because for me, what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to go before a politician and be like, oh my God, I'm intersex, and please don't please don't erase me. No, I'm not doing that. You know? And so for me, I don't have the answer. I feel like the templates we have, I think they need to be revised. They need to be done away with. I think we are up against larger, more darker forces that are very well, have a lot of strategy, have a lot of money. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest and say from my point of view, I think right now, especially as an intersex person, I just think we need to revisit a lot of the strategies that we have relied on, because they're not working in this political. I don't think they've ever really worked, you know, but I think especially now, I don't think that they're working. And I think, yeah, I think we need to start over, you know? So that's what I would offer.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Saifa.
You got any, Sig, that you want to?
I mean, I think that's a great answer. I think, you know, and I think to go back to, you know, thinking about like democratic, like, you know, like I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be obsessed with democracy, right? Who cares about democracy? But if like thinking about like actually like democracy in the sense of like people being engaged in making things, like that actually just intersects so well with what I would say. Like we can't just actually like, you know, like it's not just saying the right thing. We got to like actually engage in creating things and knowledge together.
Yeah.
Do we have anyone else in the room that wants to ask a question before I ask our last?
We got a hand.
Oh, we got some. Great. Okay. All right.
I saw the person with the red hair.
I'm going to have you, if you're able to come this way, because it's going to make a terrible noise.
I just wanted to ask, what's your favorite science fact that was like popular for years but has recently been disproven?
Oh, wow.
Oh shoot. Wow. Thank you for that. That's a great great question. Let's see, what is best science fact? Well, okay, this is something, I mean, maybe related to just the first thing that came to mind. I find it fascinating that and I think like, okay, the way we think about the impact of alcohol on our bodies, right? And so the impact of alcohol in the United States, like, think for a second, oh, what do we think? Like, oh my gosh, like I even made a joke today. I'll admit, Mom, I had some champagne before I sat down. She's spoiled. So I had some champagne. I was like, oh, that'll make me less inhibited, like I'll be more relaxed, right? A little social lubricant there, right? And so like being able to all the different things we say, and I actually know that there's lots of studies that like depending on what culture you're in and what norms there are, it doesn't actually like make you uninhibited, like depending on like what country or what kind of norms are around you, which blows my mind, right? Because like I feel definitely, and it doesn't mean that it's not real for me, because it is real, because that's part of like one of the things of understanding that the real truths about science actually have to do with our cultural truths too, right? So the way my body responds has to do with how culturally I've learned it will respond. So yeah, that champagne worked magic. I hope that's okay to say to your kid, teaching them some important things about alcohol. And I mean, I think that's really important for everybody to know, because like also like the idea that alcohol is an excuse, right? And that like relate like that, like I don't know, I was drinking, right? Like I don't know, right? So like I think that's the responsible thing that I just shared with your young person. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Sig. This is amazing work. Congrats. So confession, when I was first enamored with science, it was with economics, which has been one of the most deadliest sciences ever practiced in the world. You know, we can imagine the end of the world before we can imagine the end of capitalism, a lot of us.
Woof. Woof.
And I'd love to hear you talk more about feminist tinkering and the feminist values that you're bringing to tinkering, because when you look at, you know, speaking of schools in Chicago, when you look at the economists, they were doing a lot of tinkering. They were doing a lot of experimentation. And so I just want to hear more about, I mean, you've talked about participatory, you've talked about bottom up, but I just want to hear more about the values of tinkering that you want to bring to science.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so and one of the key parts of the book is looking at how tinkering can be understood through in many different ways, right? So like I critique the idea of tinkering as if it's like culturally neutral and you're just like messing around with it. And when I started looking at this idea of tinkering, it was because I was looking at synthetic biology labs, which I can say a lot about. I won't right now, but you can read the book. Oh yeah, read the book. Synthetic biology. I was like, wait, there's a book I wrote about this. Oh my gosh, that's why I wrote the book. So I don't know. Okay, so I was like, synthetic biology labs and these DIY biology labs were starting to use this idea of tinkering, right? And it's similar to like almost like the hacking language too, right? It gets people excited and we're like, doing something cool. But one of the main arguments I make in the book is that like it depends again on what values go into that, right? And so, but I try to reclaim tinkering after I talk about tinkering being this kind of like, masculinist, white, Eurocentric idea of being able to play with anything you want to, right? And then not have any ethical oversight. And so that's like the first half is a lot of, naughty on them, right? And then the second half, though, I'm like, well, what do we have to do with tinkering, right? And how can we put these feminist values in? And so the values that I focus on is like how I actually look at this like similar aspects of tinkering from the first sites that I'm looking at that I heavily critique, and I look at how feminists have used some of these things in ways that I think are more fruitful for us who care about creating other worlds and dreaming about something outside of capitalism. And so one of the first things is playfulness, and like thinking again as playfulness as something as not having the answers, right? This not having the answers and playing with different ways of doing things. So not being like, this is the way, right? Like, okay, so like I'm an activist, so I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Like again, kind of back to what you just said. Like we need new strategies. We also need to constantly be reflecting and updating our strategies, right? So that's to me a feminist value is this reflection, which I try to do in the book too with these vignettes, is like being like, okay, where was I at this point, and how do we constantly come back to this? But how do we do it? Like the playfulness also is that like activists and organizers have taught us so much about joy, right? And like not just like that, like we need to like living this from like a lot of like Black activists and scholars have been talking a lot about what does it mean to like actually be and live. And so that is part of playfulness too, right? Is like literally what we think about play, laughing together, right? Yeah, like totally. like laughing together, being able to eat food together. I've shared, sharing food with folks, all these kinds of things, right? But in the sense of science, like being able to like when we do something that we're talking about knowledge production, that we're able to like try something new, but be accountable at the same time, right? The second thing I talk about is this hands-on stuff, which again is like, this, I think is the second thing is like, I think feminists often are like, I actually, and I have debates with some folks don't agree with this, but I think a feminist perspective is that we don't just like, we don't use the motto, like, why did you climb Mount Everest? Because it was there, right? Like, I don't think that's a good reason to do things, right? And so like for some, but that's like the thing behind a lot of science, as if we don't have other values informing what we actually do. It's like, well, that was interesting. I could study this like minute part of the body, but why? Right? Like, well, because I want to name it something, right? Or whatever. Like, and so like asking why we're asking the questions we are. And to me, hands-on means that there is some kind of there is some kind of activist goal, right? There is something about creating a better world in it. To me, that is action. Like all feminist research to me is action oriented. And the third part is like more of like iterative like work, and that reflection, just honing in on reflection more. Thank you so much for that question.
This will be our last question. There's 2 questions online that are very similar, so I'm just going to combine them. They're both really great questions. What's an example of a community or democratized science project that's inspiring you right now, locally or globally?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, thanks. I had the pleasure of working with folks who were based out of Barcelona during this project and looking into some of the work they were doing. That was like 2 different groups, and one of them is called Quimera Rosa, and they were doing a lot of stuff that was playing with both the body and gender, and they called themselves trans feminists, but not just simply with thinking about transgender politics, but thinking transnationally and thinking about like actually against binaries in every sort of way. And one of the folks from this project that I spent time with and I write about in the book some was actually like taking chlorophyll injections and called them, it was an art/science project called Transplant, right? But like thinking about the boundaries between not only like our human like humans, but thinking about these boundaries between Earth and plants, other living things, other non-living things, right? And I think again, like in this moment of climate, like just the end of the Earth, right? Or like it's so important, the end of us, yeah, and like maybe the end of us, and what does that mean? What does that mean for how crucial it is to actually think beyond borders right now? All kinds of borders. I'll leave it at that.
Woof.
Throw my glasses.
Yeah. It's a good way to end it. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. Yeah. Thanks to our online folks. I'm going to encourage y'all who want to get a copy of the book signed by Sig while supplies last to click the teal button at the bottom center of the screen. We really appreciate your patience with switching sites so that we could get this recorded. We're so glad you're with us. And we will share this recording for anybody who missed it. So it'll be up on our YouTube channel in just a couple days. Thanks to all of you who are physically here with us in the room tonight. There are signing pins in that box right there. So Sig, you're just going to stay put. If folks already have, you just like, that's your throne. If folks have your books already, you can just line up. And if you need to buy a book, there are lots more books for sale up front at the front counter with Sara. So thank you all. Let's give these folks one more round of applause.